Good morning. This lost bowl here, I'm not going to go with the effect at the beginning. And we're not going to talk about how to save the world today. What we're going to talk about is the DMAIC process. What is the DMAIC process? Well, if you don't know, Six Sigma is a method of measuring or helping to decide, to troubleshoot, and the DMAIC process is the process used in Six Sigma. So the D stands for define, the M stands for measure, the A stands for analyze, the I implement, and the C is control. And today we're just going to talk about control, the control phase. We haven't talked about any of the other phases, but right now, personally, I'm struggling with the control phase of my own processes at work. Not because I don't know how to set those processes up, but getting the culture of the company to accept the DMAIC phase. It's not easy because Six Sigma is a very strict process, and it's a very well controlled process when done correctly. And a lot of places don't like to do that because of the money involved. Now, if you set up do a design for Six Sigma, you'll be ahead of the game. You take the time to set up your process to comply with Six Sigma, and you will find that you will have a lot less quality issues, a lot or an easier the ability, I should say, to make changes because the process is standardized and you have ways to measure the process. But we're going to talk about the control phase. And in the control phase, and what it is it's the phase at which you've done all your work in your process, and at the end, you have some way to determine whether it's working or not, and or to make sure that the consistency is the same. So if, for example, you had you were making metal rods, extruding metal rods, and every single rod had to be 12 inches long. And what you want to do is you want to build in the quality as best you can. So the first pass, you want it to be 12 inches long. How do you do that? Well, do you have somebody stand there and cut it when it comes out every 12 inches? Without a ruler? You tell them that it's got to be 12 inches long. Do they cut it correctly? No. It's never going to happen that way. Maybe 1 out of a trillion you might actually get like within a millimeter of 12 inches, or a quarter inch, I should say, or something. But it will never happen. So you have to find some other way to control that method. Now, I'm not going to talk about the 8 waste, but let's just say, for an example, that if you did that, right, it came out and you had one person just cutting links. Well, they could cut it too short or too long, but if they cut it too long. If they cut it too short, it's going to get scrapped. It goes right back in the pile, back scrapped. But in any case, you would have to rework it. So you would send it to another station where somebody else would have to measure it and then cut it again. Well, that's double the work. It's waste. But it is a control. If that's the only control you have, it is, by definition, measurable. So if the first pass it was too long. They went to the second pass. It was 12 inches. They had a scale there to cut it by. And then you could have a third person auditing the process. So what does control do? It keeps the standard in place. It keeps you from sending a part out of specification. It keeps the process in control, depending on which process we're talking about, and it can be verified or audited. And how do we audit it? Well, like we said, the 12 inches that the rod has to be, there's a person at the end who is writing it down and checking to see that every part that has been reworked, cut again to 12 inches exactly, is exactly the way it's supposed to be. What if there was another standard on there? No, let's skip that. Let's just keep going. So the control process says I can verify that and make sure that nothing is getting to the customer. Now, there's a lot of waste involved there. In fact, we'll talk about that in a minute. But why do we have the need, or why do we need to audit? Well, we want to make sure that, first of all, that the control that we put into place is effective. We want to know that every time that that person cuts to 12 inches, they're doing it correctly. Now, if they're just measuring it with a stick that's 12 inches long, say, pre-cut, 12 inches, and they put it on there and then they mark it and they go. Well, you're going to get pretty close every single time, maybe on the spot every time until something happens. And this is the second reason. We want to make sure that the effect of the control is still good and still relevant. So let's say that every time they have a wood stick that's 12 inches long. Excuse me. 12 inches long. And they mark the metal from one end to the other end of the wood stick, and they mark it 12 inches because they already decided that it's 12 inches long. Now, it's consistent, but for how long? Let's say that every time you put the stick away, that you put it downward, or it gets dropped on the floor, or you put it on one of the ends, or it just wears over time because it is wood. It wears over time. So your effect and your relevance, the stick is no longer relevant because it's worn. Now it's no longer exactly 12 inches. And it's not effective any longer. But you won't know that unless you audit. And you have to decide when to audit. Now, these are all human things that are in this process, right? You've got the guy cutting it off, or the person, I should say, cutting it off of the machine, the person reworking the part, and then the people that are supposed to come and make sure that the audit is correct. So, be that as it may, it's there's a lot of variables there. And variation is the enemy of all processes. Because if you don't standardize, you can't make changes and you cannot effectively audit your process. So, knowing that, that's what the control is. I have this issue at work. It's all human factor. We move from one process to the other. And here's the thing that we know, just like the person who is cutting the metal as it comes off of the extruder, we know that it's not going to be in spec. And so it is out of customer specification right there, and every time we got to rework it. And then we have to depend on an auditor to make sure that it's correct. What if that auditor is half blind? What if they're having a bad day? What if the measuring tool that they're using is out of spec? How do they even know? Are they using a wood stick also to make sure that it's correct? And what are they doing with the data that they get? God, you can't imagine the expense. The expense is ridiculous. And what if it gets past them and gets to the customer? What will the customer do? Will they ask for a sort? They say, we're going to bring in a sort company. We're going to put people over there. We're going to charge you for it. And then we want answers to why it happened. And we want to see these changes happen. Well, that's all cost above and beyond, all waste. And how do you fix your system? Well, a better control in this case would probably be a sensor that senses every 12 inches off of the extruder and then automatically cuts it off. Now, is that expense too high for the costs that or the profits you're going to make off the rods themselves? It's an opportunity cost, really. And then you have to look at that compared to what does it cost you when you miss, right? Now, you can write these people up every day, right? You can say, hey, look, you missed this one, you're getting written up. And eventually, you fire those people. Then you have a turnover rate. And maybe those people have been there for a long time, but maybe what they're using is not effective. Maybe there's too much creative process there's too much creativity in the process, which means it's like an artist, you have to decide whether it's right or wrong. But it's in the eye of the beholder, right? Same thing happens when you're inspecting. If you don't follow your audit schedule, the chances of the process changing vary widely. They could happen way widely. People could just pencil whip, just expecting the process to be right, check a few parts, check the first 3 parts of a run, and miss a whole lot more. So what do we want to do for a control? A control can be a pokey yoke, a hard or a soft pokey yoke. In this case, you could call the rework station a soft pokey yoke because there's so much variability in there, and it's rework. You don't ever want to pay for rework, but in this case, you believe that your costs are less than actually automating. Or you could put a hard pokey yoke in this case, a sensor that would determine the length of the part and cut it to the right length. And then you can audit. But you can have built-in quality too. You can gather information based on that sensor. And if the sensor is working correctly, and you'll see that because it will go off every time it goes off, because every part has gone through there, it's got cut, well, you know that the parts are correct, or that you know the process is working. Now you just have to audit it. So what usually do? Well, you would audit it every once in a while. You would go in there and you would physically, as a person, audit it, or you would have another sensor along the line that would tell you whether it's correct or not, or some kind of designed bin where it won't fit in there if it's not 12 inches or it doesn't fall through something that is a hard pokey yoke. So we talked about control. Control is probably the most important aspect, because what it does is make sure that your process is effective and that you know it's standardized and you know that you can audit that process. So let's talk about the others later, but for right now, remember, without control, you don't know what's going on. Hey, have a great day. This is Lost Bull. Think Six Sigma every day of your life. Thanks. Bye.